I recently came across a video by Kev Collins talking about something I was planning on making a video on: how fossil gas pushes up the cost of electricity to ratepayers in Ireland. And he got some of it right, but he also got a lot of things very wrong. So today on Decarbonize, we're going to look at the video, Three Mechanisms Driving Up Costs.
There are three things happening all at once, driving up the cost of everything to the tune of billions annually, and nobody is aware of them.
It's fair to say that most people aren't, but I am. I've already done videos on two of his three issues: curtailments and putting a cost on carbon. In my previous video, I asked if people were interested in me making a video on his first issue.
My favorite one of these is marginal pricing. More and more I see these posts on social media, like this one from the Irish Times, which says wholesale electricity prices halved on recent windy days. It gives the impression that our bills should be lower on windy days, but that's not the case. Another post on LinkedIn from a policy manager at ESB, a graph showing solar producing 13% of Ireland's electricity demand on a day in May. Now, both of these are true, but how come I don't see any of these savings on my bill? If we're saving like $1 million here and like $1 million there, why are my bills only going up? Ireland's wholesale electricity market stacks generators from cheapest to most expensive and until the demand level is reached. Our generators are primarily hydro, wind, solar, and gas.
You'd think from his graphic that hydro and solar were bigger than gas. The truth is that most of the electricity generated in Ireland is from gas or wind, which contribute between 30 and 40% each. Hydro and solar are just a few percentage points, but solar is growing quickly. The other big contributor is imported electricity from Britain, which far exceeds hydro and solar.
And every day we'll have a mix of those until we meet the demand line. The generators all bid different prices, so wind bids near zero because that's essentially what wind costs, but gas has to bid very high because it's a combustible fuel and it has to be extracted and processed. But the price paid to every generator is the price that's set by the last and most expensive unit needed. That's called the marginal unit.
Kev is correct as far as he goes, but he's missing two important parts of the setting of the price of electricity in the wholesale market. First, they're bidding their marginal cost, not their total cost. If it costs 5 or 120 euro to generate an additional megawatt hour of electricity, that's what they'll bid. This covers the fuel and tax costs and whatever maintenance and operations that increase when you burn fuel, but not the fixed cost of building the power plant. If a wind farm operator always got only 5 euro, they'd never be able to repay the loans needed to build the wind farm. They'd only cover their variable or marginal costs. The second issue that Kev's analysis misses is the RES, or Renewable Energy Support Scheme. If a wind farm is in the RES, and most of them are, they've bid a set price that covers both their fixed and marginal costs. If their proposal is accepted, then that becomes their strike price. If the wholesale price is lower, the RES fund makes them whole to their accepted bid price. If the wholesale price is higher, they pay into the RES fund. The marginal price is pretty much irrelevant to anyone participating in this scheme. You can watch my video on that topic here.
And on most days in Ireland, gas is always the unit that closes the gap. And when gas sets the price, every generator, they all get paid the gas rate.
In the most recent RES auction, the strike price set was around 100 euro a megawatt hour. So if they got 120 euros, they'd have to pay 20 euros a megawatt hour to the RES fund. This would lead to about €1 a day for an average home. But the cost of fuel makes up less than half of the cost of electricity.
The €1 million avoided in gas imports from the solar post is true. Let's look at that same day with all of the other fuels in the mix. So now here we can see where solar is, but there's still a gigantic portion of fossil fuels needed to meet demand. And solar is getting paid the same as fossil fuel prices. So sure, we saved 1 million by not importing fossil fuels, but solar still got paid the market price set by fossil fuels. So that's why we don't see a drop on our bills.
Given the RES mechanism, when we burn less gas, we do save money. We pay the strike price, which is less than the cost of power from gas. But we need more renewables. Our bills are high in large part because gas is an expensive way to generate electricity, and we're burning a lot of it, not because wind and solar operators are ripping us off.
So when I see these newspaper articles online or these posts online, the automatic assumption would be that, gosh, we need more renewables because more renewables are going to lead to lower prices. But unfortunately, that's simply not true.
As we develop more wind and solar power, sometimes they will produce enough that they will push gas entirely off the grid. At those times, we'll see the prices in the auction drop. And as more and more wind and solar are deployed, the fraction of times when gas is off the grid will grow, and we'll start to see large drops in the auction for electricity. And batteries will help this as well, which we'll talk about more in a bit. As renewables come to dominate, it won't be the daily auctions that set our price, but the annual res auctions.
In Europe, when gas sets the marginal price, the grid is physically interconnected to its neighbors, so it can pull from other sources, pushing the marginal price back down. But we can't.
That's why I'm a big fan of the Celtic interconnector, which will increase our ability to trade electricity with the continent. More trade makes our electricity cheaper and more reliable, as I spoke about in this video. But we already have 3 interconnectors from the island of Ireland to Britain that allow us to trade with them and all of the countries that they're connected to. I found a study, link in the description, that showed something interesting. Even in well-connected countries like the Netherlands and Germany, gas is setting the price more than any other fuel. Unfortunately, the graph from Ireland wasn't included, but I do think it's likely that gas sets the price more often here, and therefore we have a higher price for our electricity.
The next piece of the puzzle is curtailment payments. And how I like to think of this is, imagine paying for something you'll never use. Well, Irish bill payers paid more than €1 billion last year for energy that was thrown away.
I couldn't find a source for this, but assuming it's true, that would be about 20% of what is spent on electricity at the wholesale level. It's not a trivial cost, but it doesn't fundamentally change the story of our expensive electricity. It's just part of the story.
When a wind turbine generates electricity that the grid can't absorb, and when there's more wind than we have capacity to move it around, the turbine owner gets paid what's called a curtailment fee. So in that sense, we're paying for electricity we do use, but we're also paying for the electricity that we won't be using. On the continent, curtailment is intermittent, but in Ireland it is baked in. Continental grids are physically interconnected so they can move energy across borders where it's needed. But we just don't have the same interconnection, and we can't move energy to where it is needed. So we just have to pay for it not to be made. We have 2 subsea cables, 500 megawatts each, one to Scotland and one to Wales. And there's a third on the way from Youghal all the way to France. Now, that Celtic interconnector is expected to be operational by the start of 2029. And when it arrives, the total interconnection capacity is going to be 1.7 gigawatts.
First, we have 3 interconnectors to Britain, not 2, because the island of Ireland is a single market for electricity. So the cable from Northern Ireland to Scotland is part of the Irish system. So we'll be at 2.2 gigawatts when the Celtic connector is complete. Curtailment in Ireland is bad, but this is a problem everywhere, and the solutions are well understood. Upgrade the grid, which EirGrid is doing, add batteries, which is happening, and more interconnectors, which is happening. I have a video on curtailment on the Irish grid, and you'll see there that it isn't vastly worse here than it is on the continent. We'll drive our curtailment down by upgrading our grid and installing batteries.
Now, this is a really slippery slope because more wind farms without the infrastructure to export it means curtailment payments.
Here, Kev makes one of his biggest blunders. Yes, the interconnectors are bidirectional, and currently we import more than we export, which lowers bills because the electricity we import is cheaper than what we would have produced, or we wouldn't have imported it. But that's not baked in. When the wind is blowing strong, Ireland is an exporter. In a single day, the interconnectors can both import and export power. When the wind is weak, we import. And as we build more wind and solar resources, the interconnectors will become more balanced between export and import because we'll have the excess cheap electricity more often.
If the government plans to be producing 37 gigawatts of energy by 2050, which it does, that's 6 times more than today's peak demand. But if we're already paying $1 billion annually, then what are we going to be paying in 2050?
The 37 gigawatts by 2050 that Kev mentions is capacity, not average power. But the wind isn't always blowing and the sun shining, so that 37 gigawatts capacity delivers less than 10 gigawatts on average. Most of that will be consumed on island with the help of batteries balancing periods of excess and insufficient power. By 2050, we'll have over 3 gigawatts of interconnectors, so we have plenty ability to export our excesses. Or we could use the additional power to grow our economy, possibly by hosting data centers.
And in all likelihood, it's going to be much more, billions annually. The Celtic interconnector took 17 years from proposal to delivery, and we would need dozens of comparable interconnectors to export anything approaching a meaningful share of 37 gigawatts. There's nothing on the roadmap.
There are 2 more links to Britain under development. We don't need dozens, but a few more will definitely help. Mainly what we need are batteries, which can be installed in about a year.
The state talks about green hydrogen as a solution, and that's where we convert surplus energy into hydrogen and then export it by ship. Now, it's technically possible, in the same way that Ireland having a space program is technically possible. But green hydrogen requires electrolysis infrastructure at commercial scale that doesn't exist, and it requires port infrastructure that doesn't exist either. And you know how nimble and agile we are at rolling out new infrastructure, getting that up and running.
Some of the excess could be used to generate green hydrogen, and setting up electrolyzers isn't that difficult. Since the primary ingredient of fertilizer is hydrogen, the output of the electrolyzers could be used to support the agricultural needs of Ireland and maybe even export fertilizer, which is much easier to transport than hydrogen. I'm not saying that's what we should do, but it's not an absurd idea.
There are emerging plans for a €2 billion privately funded underground hydrogen storage facility in Carlow, but they're at the proposal stage and nowhere near the scale required to absorb the volume of generation being discussed. Nothing on a timeline that aligns with 37 gigawatts by 2050.
It's interesting that he mentions the most speculative and expensive energy storage mechanism and not grid-scale batteries that are the fastest growing element of the grid everywhere. There are 2.7 gigawatts of battery projects either already deployed or in development for Ireland. That's over half our current peak demand. That's where most of the excess power will go, and this will lower curtailment, and it will also lower the marginal price as less expensive power from batteries charged by renewables will help kick gas out of the auction. And it's not just lithium batteries. An iron-air battery is planned for Donegal, a CO2 battery in Offaly, and a second pumped hydro project has been proposed at the site of a former silver mine in Tipperary. This is what the future of the Irish grid looks like. We build enough wind and solar power that on average we can power the country without gas setting the price. When the wind is blowing hard, we charge our batteries and sell the excess power over the interconnectors to France and Britain and the countries they're connected to. During the times when the wind isn't blowing or the sun isn't shining, we rely on our batteries and neighbors to power the country. To see a detailed vision of this future, which is about 10 years away, you can watch this video. Kev's third point of concern is
there's a new European Union mechanism coming in 2028 called ETS2, and it's going to directly increase the cost of everything.
ETS2 is an emissions trading system, which is a way of putting a price on carbon. This is the most efficient way of reducing carbon pollution. I have a video on that as well. If Kevin has a preferred way of fighting climate change, I missed it.
It covers road transportation, fuels, and home heating, so petrol, diesel, gas, and oil. The system is designed to make fossil fuel use prohibitively expensive in a bid to reduce carbon, but there's a raft of side effects of the policy.
Kev spends a lot of time talking about the carbon tax's impact on fishing and agriculture, And I'm not going to discuss that other than to say most of Ireland's competitors in the food sector are European and therefore subject to the same carbon cost. Therefore, the cost will be passed on to consumers. The cost of ETS2 will be between 11 and 25 cents per liter of diesel or petrol through the end of the decade. It's about the same as the cost added by the war in Iran, but rather than bombs, we get investments. I wouldn't describe this as prohibitively expensive, but enough to encourage you to consider getting an EV the next time you purchase a car, which can work even in Ireland's dispersed population. And the funds raised by ETS2 will finance improving our charging network and other infrastructure that supports decarbonization. As someone who lives in the west of Ireland, in a town, and owns an EV, we've rarely had difficulty finding a charging station when needed. But it could be better, especially when you're off the motorways.
There's one last piece to this puzzle, and it's the data center. They are pushing our prices up as well. Electricity transmission charges increased by 38% in 2025, explicitly because of the cost of upgrading the grid to handle higher demand from data centers. But what is specific to Ireland is that data centers are responsible for 88% of all additional electricity demand in the last 10 years. So we're at a crossroads. Do we call it a day and say, you know what, 72 data centers in Ireland is more than enough for now? We should probably wait a couple of years before we add more.
The government has released their Large Energy User Action Plan, or LEAP, to accommodate new heavy energy industries like data centers or hydrogen electrolyzers, paired with the development of on-site renewable energy. Imagine a data center outside of Limerick, surrounded by wind turbines and solar panels on the roof, and a grid-scale battery next door. Or maybe electrolyzers and a fertilizer plant in Cork with an undersea cable to a nearby offshore wind farm. This allows development to continue without burdening the rest of us. Kev provides an accurate description of the marginal price auctions, but a misleading description of their impacts, ignoring critical elements of our system like the Renewable Energy Support Scheme and the difference between marginal and fixed costs. He accurately describes the problem of curtailment, but ignores how new low-cost grid-scale batteries can reduce the amount that curtailment occurs. And he exaggerates the cost of the ETS2, the new carbon tax, without offering a better way to accelerate our decarbonization journey. If you've learned something, Kev, I recommend subscribing to my channel. I've discussed many of these issues from an Irish perspective, and you can support my channel by buying me a pint or a YouTube thanks. Maybe you want to watch more of my videos on decarbonization in Ireland. I always appreciate the comments and respond to them if I can think of something useful to say. And please forward this video on to everyone you know who thinks electricity in Ireland is too expensive, but doesn't know why.